PubMed, wildcards, and a mysterious term called LEMA, a real-world deposition breakdown. In high-stakes litigation, how an expert searches for literature is a component of their credibility. Today we're discussing a real deposition from the Onglyza multi-district litigation, where an expert was pressed on exactly that, his search strategy. The context of the case. The plaintiffs alleged that type 2 diabetes medication Onglyza increased the risk of heart failure. To support their claims, they presented expert testimony. Of course, so did the defense. One of the key experts for the defense was Dr. Todd Lee. Now, Dr. Lee holds a PharmD and also a PhD in pharmaceutical outcome research. He teaches pharmacoepidemiology at a university. He's consulted with numerous pharmaceutical companies, and he's authored a ton of peer-reviewed articles. But in this case, what mattered most wasn't his resume, but the methods he used in arriving at the conclusions that he did in his expert report. During his deposition, Dr. Lee was asked a pair of simple but powerful questions. Did you perform your own literature search? And what were those methods and strategies of those searches? I'm going to read a few lines of the deposition for those listening to this in podcast format and not actively watching. We're looking at the deposition transcripts, and just to set things up here, Mr. Clark is one of plaintiff's attorneys, and he's always asking the question. So if you see Q, it's always coming from Mr. Clark. If you see A or answer, that is always coming from Dr. Lee. Question: did you perform your own literature search? I certainly would have done PubMed searches as part of finding information for this particular study this particular case. Question: and I'm a little confused by that. What do you mean you certainly would have done? Answer: well, I received materials from Miss Paley and her associates, but I would have also done PubMed searches on my own to try and understand what was happening in the space of DPP-4s and in general diabetes, right? And for context, Miss Paley is one of the defense attorneys. Question from Mr. Clark: the reason why I asked this is, again, you said you would have. Does this mean you did? Yeah, sorry, I did. Question: how did you begin your literature search? Are you asking, like, how did I specifically search for things in the peer-reviewed literature? Yes. What was your method that you applied in performing literature search? Dr. Lee: just like any other literature search, I would have relied on PubMed as my resource for identifying peer-reviewed literature. So if I was searching for drug classes associated with treatment of diabetes, I would have searched PubMed. What's your process for confirming that you've captured all of the potentially relevant literature? Answer: using alternative search terms, looking at reference lists from prior articles. All of that would have, I guess, provided some confidence that I was hopefully comprehensive, and then, contrasting that with information that I received as part of this review that I had done. And defense attorneys for a little bit went down a rabbit hole of critically evaluating his statistical analysis methods, and then after a few minutes they picked back up the research and literature search question. So this is again from Mr. Clark. Question: what are the search terms that you used in your PubMed searches? Dr. Lee: it depends on what I was looking for. So if I was looking for background information on diabetes, I might have included mesh terms like diabetes type 2 or type 2 diabetes. There are a number of search strategies that you can utilize. If you're looking for a DPP-4, for example, specific information, I would have the term I think the librarians used are exploded term for DPP-4s that you can search within the subheadings and look for exploded term that searches variants of those. So a number of different strategies around specific search terms. Question: do you keep any type of list of the output of your PubMed searches? I do not have a list of the output of the PubMed searches. Okay. Is there any way for you to access past searches that you've done in this case? Answer: I don't know if I was logged in under my user profile on PubMed or Medline, so I'm not sure. Question. Wouldn't you have had to have been logged in to access the database? No. Question. Is that your normal practice? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Dr. Lee. Continue. And then they pick back up a question from Mr. Clark. Is it your routine practice to be logged in when performing searches? Answer, no. Question. Can you provide me some of the specific terms that you used other than what you previously discussed? Answer. This will not be completely comprehensive, but it would be search terms like observational, randomized control trials, CVOTs, safety, hospitalizations for heart failure. There would have been a wide-ranging number of searches. And during this part of the deposition, this is the kind of odd exchange where Mr. Clark is, I think, trying to unsettle Dr. Lee around his search strategies and his techniques, and to cast doubt on whether he did indeed use best practice when searching for the literature. So Mr. Clark asks, are you familiar with the term LEMA? Answer, no. Okay, it's a variability of spelling of different terms when you're running a search. For example, Saxa, saxagliptin, saxaglip, and alternative different spellings. Does that sound familiar now? Dr. Lee, yeah, I know the methodology to put in wildcards, for example, in text, partial text strings, but I don't know LEMA. That's the formal name for it in linguistics. Did you use any wildcard searches in your PubMed search in this case? Oh, I'm sure that I would have included wildcard searches around Saxa, saxagliptin, sitagliptin. Again, I'm not going to be able to be precise with all those exact terms. So don't feel bad, Dr. Lee. I've been a librarian for 20 years. I've never heard the term LEMA. Why? Well, because it's not a term in evidence-based searching, biomedical databases, systematic review methodology. There's no PubMed setting. There's no Ovid command or research best practice called LEMA. It seems pretty clear. I think the attorney really means like wildcard searching, truncation, variant spellings. And Dr. Lee did a really good job of saying, oh, no, this is what you mean, like wildcard searching. And yes, I did do that, and here's kind of how I did that. So I think Dr. Lee did a really good job of defending against that. The only thing I can think of where Mr. Clark got this term is, yes, it's a linguistics term, but it's a computational linguistics term, and it's completely out of context when searching databases for literature. And I think Dr. Lee, to his credit, handled this moment with professionalism. So I think that this is a good reminder of, in high-stakes litigation, misusing technical language, it can backfire a little bit. And if you're going to challenge an expert's methodology, make sure you actually know the vocabulary. And if you're an expert, be ready to translate your process with clarity and confidence. And that's exactly what Dr. Lee did here. You know, they really threw a curveball at him saying, hey, have you heard of LEMA? And he's like, no, I don't know what that is. But yes, I did, the wildcard searches and the truncation. And this one brief moment during the deposition should be cringeworthy for anybody who's familiar with Cochrane or PRISMA systematic review processes, or scientific method, or just even a genuine attempt at objectivity. So Mr. Clark asked the question, what's the primary source for the references in your literature report, in your expert report? Dr. Lee answers, that will be information that I largely received from counsel. Ouch. So if you're supposed to be an objective expert, you just admitted that the attorneys that hired you gave you all of the literature to review, and that's the bulk of what you were working with in your included literature. So that is not best practice. You're supposed to clearly define your key questions and your inclusion and exclusion criteria. Then you do your comprehensive literature search. You have your haul of, say, 500 or 1,000 or 10,000 sources. Then you sift through those using your very rigid inclusion exclusion criteria. And then you have a second person who's independently also sifting through that same literature with the same inclusion exclusion criteria. So you can safely say, look, this is objective methodology, but if somebody, particularly attorneys, just give you the literature they want you to review in order to come to a specific conclusion, that looks like advocacy to me, not science. So now that we've had a chance to review the deposition transcripts and we got a good glimpse at the search techniques and strategies that Dr. Lee used to come up with at least some of the literature that he depended on to craft his expert report, let's talk about what he did well. One thing I think we got a good indication of was that he probably used a lot of alternative search terms, synonyms, acronyms, different drug names. He used the wildcard truncation method. So I think he probably did an excellent job there. He didn't capture his full search strategy, and that was what Mr. Clark was getting at when he was like, could you get a record of your search strategy and all the terms that you use? Did you log into PubMed? That's where he was going with that, and I'm going to dig into that a little bit further into the video. But I think we got a good indication that Dr. Lee probably used a lot of different terms to search for. He also mentioned that he used what we call reference chasing. There's two parts of that, backward searching and forward searching. If you're unfamiliar with what reference chasing, backward and forward searching is, I just did a video of that, and that can be found on my LinkedIn or YouTube, and I will include a link in the notes to this video as well. I think he also at least made some attempt and had a little bit of awareness of possible bias. He acknowledged receiving articles primarily from defense, which I mentioned made me cringe. But he did say, hey, I did a PubMed search. I did find some other things. And that at least shows a little bit of reflexivity on his part. So let's talk about what's missing from Dr. Lee's deposition responses and his expert report when compared to Cochrane or PRISMA standards for conducting a systematic, comprehensive literature search. And remember, the Cochrane or PRISMA, that's the gold standard that expert witnesses should be using when they're doing their literature searching. If you're questioning whether Dr. Lee's responses sufficiently demonstrated a true comprehensive literature search strategy, in short, no. So let's talk about what Dr. Lee did not mention in his deposition, nor did he include in his expert report that he should have. First of all, he needed to have used a more structured search protocol or a structured search strategy. And that would include using things like Boolean operators, filters, limits. It's great that he used the truncation and wildcard methods, but there's a lot more to a truly structured search protocol than just a couple techniques. Secondly, and this is a biggie, he needed to have looked in multiple databases. He searched in PubMed, that's the go-to, but you have got to look in several other databases to be thorough. He could have used Embase, Scopus, Web of Science, Cochrane, Google Scholar, you name it. And you need to do this because they're going to find unique sources. There's going to be a lot of overlap, but there's going to be a lot that only appears in one of those databases and not in the others. Another thing that he should have done was he should have used forward citation tracking, and that is important to see what studies or articles have come out that are citing, your articles or studies that you're including in your report. Another thing that we've already mentioned that's a biggie is you have to have documentation of what you have done. We don't know the dates that he searched. Did he search back only 5 years, 20 years, back 100 years? What search terms were used? There's no record of that. We don't know the results of, each of those search strategies. Did one of them find 500 and another find 500? And in the end, his short list of sources he was working with, was it 1,000 or 10,000 or only 30? We don't know. There was no record of that. He also should have searched in the gray literature or unpublished studies. And this is helpful because this can reduce publication bias. We also, ideally, you would have a second librarian, researcher, go along and try to replicate your search strategy and search results. Of course, you have to have that documented, and you give that to the other person, and they run the search also, and they say, yeah, I also came up with the same number of sources you did. There was no indication that that was done at all. And also, ideally, you would have a nice PRISMA diagram or flow chart to be really transparent about what studies you had wind up selecting in the end. And so it's going to say, I started with 5,000, I excluded 4,950, and then I had 50 that I worked with. On the note of inclusion and exclusion methods, there's no indication that he had a predefined set of inclusion or exclusion criteria, and that is a biggie. You have to have that established before you do your literature search, or you're just going to wind up moving your goalposts. We don't know why he was tossing certain articles. We don't know why he was including other articles. And that is so critical in a truly well done systematic review or expert report. Final evaluation. Dr. Lee's methods show very reasonable diligence for expert litigation work. However, that falls short of systematic review level transparency and comprehensiveness. His process could be described as an informed but informal review that was enhanced by search experiences and supplemented by backward citation checking, but not systematic. In other words, what I'm saying is Dr. Lee did what many experts do, but he failed to document and defend his literature process with full clarity. Takeaways for experts. So what can experts and the attorneys that depend on them learn from this? Well, always disclose your literature methods in your report. Also, know the terminology used in evidence-based searching. So be ready to explain things like wildcard, mesh, database, logic, and also why you looked back as far as you did in the literature. For example, like I only look back 10 years or 30 years or 50 years, and here's the reasons why. And the final takeaway, and this is the biggest one, don't just accept a packet from counsel. Verify and supplement yourself. Do your own searches, come up with key questions prior to the literature search, and have your inclusion and exclusion criteria clearly defined before you start searching, or it's just going to look like advocacy and not scientific methodology. If you're an expert witness preparing your report or for deposition, or you're an attorney vetting methodology, this case is a goldmine. Want more real-world breakdowns like this? Subscribe, share, and check my newsletter for case studies, search strategy guides, and deposition-ready best practices. You can find me on LinkedIn, Substack, and my website, Graham Med Legal. I'm Michael Graham, and I hope you found this video insightful.